Our adventurer approaches Lulutsu, the receptionist of the Gladiators Guild that presides over the Colosseum of Ul'dah, where aspiring applicants gather for a chance at fame and fortune. Of course, the adventurer cannot help but join for a chance to inscribe his name as a true legend, but only after meeting the first sword, Milla Swordsong, the current guildmaster of the Gladiators Guild. Of course, in order to know if one is to achieve greatness, first there must come a test to ensure this adventurer will not end up yet another disappointing recruit. And so the adventurer, now a fledgling gladiator, was tasked to slay some marmots, hornets, and shrews. After all, if he failed to fell such simple beasts, how could he possibly rise to glory? Of course, this posed no challenge, and it was time for the adventurer to learn how to command an opponent's attention, which would prove useful in the future to safeguard allies who might not resist as many incoming attacks and would otherwise perish. It just so happened that Momodi, the proprietress of the Quicksand, requested some assistance as a gang of Lamentin marauders had been harassing nearby people outside her establishment. After some stern reprimands coming from our fledgling, but courageous, gladiator, the marauders outside quickly dissipated. However, upon attempting to intimidate the marauder who was inside the quicksand, who went by Farmal the Driven, he was not quite as cowardly as the others and threatened a fight. In that moment, a nearby customer of the quicksand in red clothing felt he needed to interfere. The two exchanged words until Farmal recognized the customer's sword, and cowered in fear, realizing who this man could be. The man in red approached the adventurer and struck up a conversation, introducing himself as Aldous, a former gladiator who now lived a quieter life as a carefree wanderer. He bid the adventurer goodbye, who then proceeded to check in with Momodi, the one who had requested the help against the marauders to begin with, and she was surprised as if she had seen a ghost. But she begged the adventurer not to tell Milla, seemingly based on some history between the two. The fledgling adventurer reported back, making sure to not mention all this, and Milla was quick to find him another task, some axe-wielding raiders terrorizing merchants at the Scorpion Crossing in Western Thanalan, led by no other than Farmal the Driven. Our fledgling gladiator met up with a merchant who had been recently attacked, and proceeded to attempt recovering some of the sacks of goods stolen from the caravan, which had been guarded by Farmal and his men. With the goods returned to the nervous merchant, the deed was done. Although this time it was a matter of handling some ill-behaving ruffians, who knows what manner of opponents the adventurer would face in the future, which Milla had promised more would come. Sure enough, after some time passed, Milla had some disturbing news to bear. Several violent murders of Huron men, and with several foreign lancers skulking about, and the lance being the likely weapon based on the bodies of the deceased, it seemed like as good a place to start investigating. The adventurer headed to Stone's Throw to acquire any information on the whereabouts of these suspects. As the investigation proceeded, a nearby gladiator of a lesser caliber was attacked by thugs. It seems they had mistaken him for Aldous, the wanderer from the quicksand. The adventurer was able to help him, but now had to report back to Milla. But they found themselves interrupted as it seems there were still lancers attacking Huron men. Accompanied by Bruce the Big, a gladiator with healing magics, the two took down the horde of suspected freelancers. Still, Milla needed to know why they were targeting Huron men in the first place, and it was no longer possible to keep it hidden. They were looking for Aldous, whom many had believed dead, Milla included. However, there was no time to find out why they were looking for him, as the Immortal Flames and the Brass Blades requested the guild's assistance in maintaining security at Camp Drybone, due to an increase in aggression from the Amalja. Our adventurer headed out and located an injured gladiator, proceeding to assist them push away some incoming Amalja raiders. Reporting back on yet another successful mission, Milla and the adventurer were once again interrupted, but this time by Aldous himself. Bruce and Milla were bewildered, and bewilderment turned to temper, and Milla had some choice words for him. Aldous had dishonored the Gladiators Guild years ago and then vanished. But Aldous merely wished to speak with the adventurer and invited him for a drink at the quicksand. There, he introduced himself a bit more. He had once been an adored gladiator of the Colosseum, nicknamed the Sword of Nald. His sword, named the Frenzy, is one of a pair forged for Colosseum champions by the legendary weaponsmith Geralt. However, his story had to be cut short as assailants arrived to face Aldous, and the adventurer who joined him in the fight. The two fought off the throng of archers, and Aldous lamented his plight. He just wanted to enjoy some ale, and why couldn't they ever send a horde of beauties after him? When the adventurer returned to Mila, she did not wish to talk of all this any further, as there were more important matters at hand. Another gladiator had been gravely wounded in an attack near the Coffer and Coffin, a resting stop in central Thanalan. The adventurer attended the man's wounds with a potion and started to investigate where the assailants could be. And he did stumble upon a person who had seen a strange fellow in a purple robe muttering about the wrong man and the Silver Bazaar, and found a ring with a scorpion engraving near where the gladiator had been attacked. The gladiator did not recognize the ring and suggested speaking to a man named Wymond, who knew a lot about everyone and would most likely help, for a fee. Wymond immediately recognized the ring as a sigil for a criminal organization, with spies within the Brass Blades and the Syndicate of Ul'dah, an organization known as the Alacran. Mela was surprised. What could the Alacran want with the gladiators? With some bandits located near the Silver Bazaar, it was up to the adventurer to do further investigating and help civilians along the way. Aldous reappeared, this time to warn Mela of the fight to come. But Mela did not fear the Alacran. Aldous explained further. The Alacran were after him, and thus it was his fight to handle. However, Mela did not want his assistance, not from a man who had disappeared for 7 years in disgrace, and simply wanted him gone. And so the adventurer, Mela, and various other gladiators of the guild headed to the Silver Bazaar of Western Thanalan. Although they were outnumbered, they did prevail by using strategy to take down the conjurers and thaumaturges of the Alacran first. Finally, the man with the purple robe showed himself, and Mela recognized them as well. The other gladiators went after him, but found themselves attacked by an incoming Mikote woman who mocked their frailty. The man in purple, who carried a sword that looked identical to the one Aldous owned, ordered the woman Zana to stand down as they left. Mela stood flabbergasted. This was Levold, a former champion of the Gladiators Guild as well. The gladiators returned to the guild in order to tend to the wounded. Aldous reappeared, saddened that the gladiators decided to go to that fight despite his warnings. Mela questioned him. Did he know that Levold had been among the Alacran? Levold and Aldous had once fought side by side in the Colosseum, the Twin Swords of Nalthal they had been called. When he heard Levold had helped the Alacran transform from a gang of common thieves into a feared criminal organization, he knew he had to return. Unfortunately, it seemed the gladiator had been taken by the Alacran. The adventurer went to rescue them, realizing it was a trap, but he was able to handily defeat the ambush. The adventurer returned to Mela's gratitude and concern that with all these tasks, he should be sure to get some much-needed rest, but first talk to the guild receptionist. It seemed Lilutsu had a message to pass on from none other than Aldous, who requested they meet at the Lich Yard in Eastern Thanalan. Lilutsu promised not to speak of the rendezvous to the guildmaster for fear it would upset her. Mela Swordsong had to take charge of the guild 7 years ago, after Aldous left. Originally, he was being groomed to become the next guildmaster, and it's possible the two may have had a romantic inkling. The adventurer met with Aldous, who was paying respects at a gravestone, the one for Mela's father, who had also passed 7 years prior. One of Levold's lackeys, the woman named Zanaliega, who had struck the gladiators at the last encounter, appeared before them ready to fight Aldous in order to put her master's mind at peace. The adventurer and Aldous fought back, or rather, the adventurer fought while Aldous observed and evaluated the adventurer's skills. Of course, our adventurer gave a roaring performance and Aldous was happy Mela had dependable people to count on. But the adventurer remarked the one she needed was Aldous. But he rebuffed that statement. He was anything but dependable, and once Levold was taken care of, he would leave. After all, Aldous and Levold had been a gladiator pair in the past. But there were rumors that Aldous had been fixing matches to control the outcome. Because of this, Aldous was expelled from the Colosseum, and Levold's reputation tarnished in the process by association. Mela had to deal both with her friend's fraud and its effect on the Gladiators Guild, while also mourning her late father soon after. For Levold, he tried to go solo, but his career simply wasn't the same. Sometime later, the adventurer checks in on Mela, only to find her upset. Aldous had been arrested by the Brass Blades for plotting to assassinate the Sultana. Mela did not believe it. Aldous would never resort to poison. It had to be that the Alacran, which had ties to the monetarists of Ul'dah, were setting him up. The adventurer returned to Wyman, the person who had told them of these ties in the first place, and he was already aware of this. It seems Aldous surrendered willingly. Wyman did share that the poison Aldous was alleged to have used was one only the Corpse Brigade, a bandit organization, knew how to make. The adventurer headed to the Corpse Brigade headquarters and, after a little bit of trouble, made off with a bill of sale proving the Alacran had purchased the poison. He returned to Mila at the guild immediately, where he found out Aldous was set to be executed. The adventurer rushed to Eastern Fanaland, to Highbridge, where the execution would take place. The executioners did not care for the evidence and wanted to proceed regardless. However, it turns out the adventurer was not alone. Mila and many other gladiators appeared and threw down Aldous' sword so he could take up arms. Aldous used the blade to break free of his bindings and threatened the executioners, who then fled immediately. Leavold and his henchmen had of course been watching nearby and now stepped in to settle this once and for all. Aldous went after Leavold, while the adventurer and the rest of the Gladiators Guild fought off the goons, even as they summoned Void Sense to their aid. The Gladiators prevailed, even against the Void Slave, and victory was theirs. However, Leavold was still out, ready to fight against Aldous. The two fought, and although it was close, Aldous was able to disarm Leavold. But Leavold's anger could not pass, and rather than accept defeat and move on from the past, he chose to throw himself to his death, with his only contentment being knowing that Aldous had lost everything he cared about as well. As they returned to the Gladiators Guild, Aldous announced he would be leaving, in case the remaining members of the Alacran decided to seek revenge for Leavold's death. Mila tried to talk him out of it, but Aldous, ever the ladies' man, joked that she shouldn't get involved with him, no matter what effect he may have on the fairer sex, which only led Mila to wonder whether it had been worth saving him after all. Finally, Aldous explained his side of what happened those 7 years ago. He had been given an enormous offer in exchange for a loss. Leavold begged for him to take the offer, but he refused. Despite keeping with his honor, it was he who bore the shame, and Leavold's anger at losing out on the hefty prize. Aldous bid everyone farewell, to a dismayed Mila who gruntled she had better not wait another 7 years to see him again. It seems she might care for him after all. The end. I do hope you enjoyed this storytelling of the Gladiator questline. I absolutely love the tension between Mila and Aldous. It's clear that Mila does care for him, and that Aldous teases her knowingly. It's also a tale about forgiveness and responsibility. Had Aldous stuck around and perhaps shared his side of the story back then, he could have cleared his name and helped Mila as she took over the Gladiators Guild. Unfortunately, the past cannot be changed, and for them to get some closure and move on, that is the only possible outcome. But yeah, with that small analysis completed, I do believe that marks the end of this A Realm Abridged storytelling. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do make sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Also, be sure to let me know what this class quest means to you in the comments, and if there are any stories you would like me to cover next. A big thanks to all of you for joining me down memory lane within the world of Final Fantasy XIV. My name is Squintina, and I do hope to see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy XIV story. Do feel free to share this around to the people you know who love this game just as much as we do.